In a small, quiet town, there's an old bridge the locals call the Bridge of the Lone Traveler. Abandoned for years, it's rarely used except by the occasional tourist. Legend has it, if you walk across the bridge at midnight, you're bound to encounter a mysterious figure. This figure, dressed in a long black cloak with a hood, always stands motionless in the middle of the bridge. His face is hidden in shadow and no one knows who or what he is. But one rule must always be followed. Never look at his face. According to the legend, anyone who dares break this rule disappears without a trace. Some say they're taken to another world. Others believe their souls are trapped on the bridge, becoming part of its eerie mystery. Maxime, a young university student, came to the town to visit his relatives for the holidays. One evening during dinner, he overheard the townsfolk talking about the Bridge of the Lone Traveler. A fan of scary stories, Maxime chuckled at the idea of such a tale. To him, it was just another local myth meant to entertain or frighten. He jokingly said, "If it's really that scary, I'll go check it out myself." His relatives tried to dissuade him. "Don't tempt fate," his aunt warned with a serious tone. But Maxime, wanting to prove there was nothing to fear, decided to go anyway. That night, close to midnight, Maxime headed to the bridge with a flashlight and his phone to record everything. His plan was simple: walk across the bridge, film the entire experience, and then return home to show everyone there was nothing supernatural about it. As he approached the bridge, an unsettling stillness greeted him. The air was strangely calm, and even the trees lining the road seemed frozen in place. Turning on the camera, he spoke. "So here I am at the infamous bridge. As you can see, there's no one here. Maybe the only thing haunting this place is the occasional stray dog." He laughed nervously and began walking. The first few steps were easy, but as he ventured further, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Stopping in his tracks, he shone the flashlight around, but the bridge was empty. As he reached the middle of the bridge, something appeared in the distance. At first, it looked like a shadow, but as he got closer, it took shape. A figure standing perfectly still. It was dressed in a long black cloak with a hood, its back turned to him. Maxime froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey!" he called out. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, unmoving. Fear began creeping into Maxime's mind, but curiosity pushed him forward. Step by step, he approached the figure, trying to convince himself it was just a homeless person or a prankster. "Nothing supernatural about this," he muttered under his breath. Finally, he was close enough to see under the hood. His hand trembled as he raised the flashlight and aimed it at the figure's face. What he saw drained the blood from his face. Beneath the hood, there was no face, just an endless void, dark and cold. In that moment, Maxime felt an overpowering pull, as if the darkness was trying to drag him into it. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the bridge as the flashlight fell alongside it. The camera captured the final seconds. The flashlight illuminating the empty bridge, the sound of heavy breathing, and the shadow of the cloaked figure slowly fading into the night. The next morning, the police found Maxime's phone on the bridge. On the last recording, a shadowy figure stood in the middle of the bridge. Then, just before the video ended, the screen was consumed by darkness. Maxime was never found. After that incident, the bridge was closed to the public, and the legend only grew more terrifying. Now, the locals say the lone traveler takes anyone who dares uncover his secret, and those who disappear, they never really leave the bridge. In the heart of an old city, there stands a towering building known as Riverside Tower. Once a bustling office space, much of it has since been abandoned, with only a few floors still in use. Despite its deteriorating condition, the building harbors a dark secret, an unmarked 13th floor. The elevator buttons skip directly from 12 to 14, and the management insists the 13th floor doesn't exist. However, locals whisper about a strange phenomenon. At night, if you press a specific sequence of buttons, the elevator will stop on the forbidden floor. Those brave or foolish enough to try are never seen again. Ben, a young accountant new to the city, began working late shifts in the building. One evening, after most of his colleagues had left, he found himself alone on the 10th floor, finishing up some last-minute paperwork. The silence in the office was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of the ancient air conditioning. As he gathered his things, Ben remembered the rumors his co-workers had shared during lunch breaks. Stories about people who had dared to summon the forbidden floor. Most of them dismissed it as a creepy urban legend, but Ben was curious. He wasn't one to believe in the supernatural, and besides, he needed a little excitement in his otherwise mundane life. Stepping into the dimly lit elevator, Ben stared at the worn-out control panel. The numbers glowed faintly from 1 to 14, but no button for 13. With a chuckle, he muttered, "All right, let's see if this thing actually works." Following the whispered instructions he'd overheard, Ben pressed a sequence of buttons: 4, 2, 6, 10, 5. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the elevator jolted slightly and the display panel glitched. The numbers scrambled, flickering, before finally settling on 13. The elevator began its slow ascent, creaking and groaning as it climbed. A cold sweat broke out on Ben's forehead as the air inside the elevator grew heavier, almost suffocating. When the doors finally slid open, he hesitated. The corridor before him was bathed in a dim red light, as if the emergency lamps were the only source of illumination. The air was stale, carrying a faint metallic scent. The walls were bare concrete, and the carpeted floors he was used to were replaced by cracked tiles. It looked nothing like the rest of the building. "Hello?" Ben called out, his voice echoing down the empty hallway. No response. Clutching his phone tightly, he stepped out of the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The hallway seemed endless, stretching far beyond what should have been the physical limits of the building. Every door he passed was shut tight, some with locks that appeared rusted over. As he ventured further, he noticed strange markings on the walls, symbols that seemed ancient, yet familiar in a way he couldn't explain. The deeper he went, the louder his own heartbeat became. Then he saw it, a door slightly ajar at the end of the hallway. A faint flickering light spilled out from the crack. Against all logic, Ben felt compelled to approach. Pushing the door open, he found a room filled with old desks and chairs like an abandoned office space. But the oddest thing was the projector sitting at the center of the room, casting a black and white image onto the far wall. The picture was grainy, but as Ben squinted, he realized it was him. The footage showed him stepping out of the elevator moments earlier. The camera seemed to be following him, even though he hadn't seen anyone else. Suddenly, the image on the wall shifted. Now it showed him standing in the room, staring at the projection, just as he was now. Then the lights went out. The elevator's ding broke the silence. Ben whipped around, but the hallway was pitch black. A dim red light from the elevator beckoned him back. He bolted, not daring to look behind him, his footsteps pounding against the tiles. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. He reached the elevator just as the doors began to close. Throwing himself inside, he frantically pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its descent. The display panel flickered again, showing random numbers. Ben could feel his heart racing, but as the elevator descended, he let out a shaky breath of relief. Then the elevator stopped. The display read 13. When the doors opened this time, there was no red light, no hallway, just darkness. From the shadows, a faint figure emerged. It looked like him. Same clothes, same face. But the eyes were wrong. They were hollow, black pits. The figure tilted its head and smiled, a grin that stretched unnaturally wide. Before Ben could react, the figure lunged forward and the elevator doors slid shut. The next morning, the cleaning staff found the elevator stuck on the 13th floor. When they pried it open, it was empty. Ben's phone and bag were lying neatly on the floor, but he was gone. Now the staff refuses to work late, and the rumors about the forbidden floor have only grown. They say the elevator still stops there sometimes, but if you're lucky, you'll never find out what's waiting behind those doors. On the outskirts of a small, forgotten town lies an abandoned amusement park known as Willow Creek Carnival. Once a bustling destination filled with laughter and joy, the park has been left to decay for decades. The roller coasters stand frozen in time. The Ferris wheel creaks in the wind, and rusted clown faces grin eerily from shattered booths. But it's not just the haunting appearance that keeps people away. Locals claim that if you wander into the park at night, you'll hear voices, soft whispers, distant laughter, and sometimes even screams. No one knows where they come from, but everyone agrees on one thing. If you hear them, you should leave immediately. Jake and his friends, adventurous and a little too confident for their own good, decided to visit the park one night. It was Halloween, and they wanted a thrill to match the spooky season. Armed with flashlights and a camera, they climbed through a gap in the rusted chain-link fence and stepped into the forgotten fairground. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp wood and rusting metal. Their footsteps crunched on the cracked pavement as they wandered through the eerie remnants of the park. "Creepy, but kinda cool," Jake said, shining his flashlight on a faded carousel. The paint had peeled, revealing dull wooden horses frozen mid-gallop. A low groan echoed as the carousel slowly turned, though there was no wind. "Okay, that's weird," one of his friends muttered. As they ventured deeper, they found the main square, where once the crowds must have gathered. The center was dominated by the Ferris wheel, its rusted frame towering above them like a skeletal giant. Jake pointed the camera at it and joked, "Imagine if this thing started moving." They laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. Then faintly from somewhere in the distance, they heard it, a soft giggle. The group froze. "Did you hear that?" one of them whispered. "Yeah," Jake said, scanning the shadows with his flashlight. "Probably just the wind." But as they stood there, the giggle came again, this time clearer, closer. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like a child. They followed the sound, drawn toward an old funhouse at the edge of the park. The building leaned slightly to one side, its entrance marked by a massive clown face with a gaping mouth. The paint had long since faded, leaving the clown's grin cracked and sinister. "We shouldn't go in there," one friend said, stepping back. "Oh, come on," Jake replied. "It's just a building." Pushing the creaking door open, they stepped inside. The air was colder here, and their flashlights cast long, distorted shadows on the warped walls. The funhouse mirrors, though cracked and dirty, reflected their movements in strange, twisted ways. Then the whispers began. At first it was a faint murmur, too quiet to make out. But as they moved deeper into the funhouse, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, overlapping, calling out. "Help us! Don't leave! They're coming!" Panic set in as the voices seemed to surround them. One of Jake's friends bolted toward the exit, only to trip and fall. The others rushed to help, but in the confusion, Jake turned toward a mirror and froze. In the reflection, he saw not just himself, but the outlines of others, figures standing behind them, staring with hollow eyes. One of the figures, a small child, raised a hand and pointed directly at Jake. "Run!" the whispers hissed. Jake grabbed his friend, pulling him to his feet, and they all sprinted out of the funhouse. The whispers followed them, growing louder, almost deafening. As they stumbled back into the open air, the sounds abruptly stopped. Breathing heavily, they didn't waste time. They ran straight for the fence, scrambling through the gap and collapsing on the other side. Turning back, they saw the park, silent and still, as though nothing had happened. Except for one thing. The Ferris wheel, which had been stationary for decades, was slowly turning. The groaning of its rusted gears echoed through the night, and as they watched, they could swear they saw figures seated in the carts, swaying gently in the moonlight. Jake and his friends never spoke about that night again, but every so often, someone passing by the park reports hearing faint laughter or whispers carried on the wind. And those who get too close swear they can see shadowy figures wandering among the ruins, forever trapped in the ghostly carnival of Willow Creek.